area is the energy renovation of our existing housing stock. The council has a comprehensive retrofit programme underway to modernise the existing housing fabric. In conjunction with that, we have an ambitious multi-year regeneration programme looking at upgrading 4 of the city's most socially deprived residential communities. This involves the energy upgrades of homes, but also the selective demolition of derelict buildings and infilling with the creation of new facilities and services. In finishing, we do face many challenges across the globe at this moment in history. It is a time of monumental change, where the next 10 years are of the utmost importance. What will we do with these years? Future generations will look back at this decade and say, if I only had been there, alive there, I would have made them understand. I would have acted. Events like this one today, where people come together, sharing innovations, knowledge, and yes, explaining the local challenges too, gives me hope. Technology allows us to meet others from around the world and better understand that their challenges are also ours. Only together can we get this world back on a sustainable path. Thank you very much indeed. Ramila Mahadev.
Thank you very much. And we appreciate your and apologies, Ozan. Thank you for letting me in. We switched devices over here, so hopefully this one is a little more stable. Mayor Foley, thank you very much for sharing Limerick's experience, and we will maybe ask participants that if you have any questions or you want to dig deeper into any of the mayor's presentations, have those on standby. And once we've heard from each of our panelists today, then we'll open up for some questions that might be general to all of the mayors, or perhaps also specific to some of their experiences and the work that they are doing. So I am going to look at my list here. And do we have Mayor Rajendran here?
We will need to move on to Ricardo Bruno.
Okay. 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 If hailing from Portugal, from Braga, Portugal, we have Mayor, and it's a very long name, but I see on the screen Mayor Ricardo Rio. So I will go with the shorter version, and it's less chance of me mispronouncing your name, sir. Welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you tuning in. It's probably getting a little bit later in the day in Portugal right now. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Well, thanks, Derek. First of all, thanks for the invitation to participate in this very important forum. Greetings to all the members of the panel and to all the ones that are following physically or digitally this panel. I will take my time to share a couple of experiences on how my city, the city of Braga, which is Portugal's third most important city, has handled in recent years with the matter of the Sustainable Development Goals, which has been a significant priority for me as a mayor. I was elected the first time in 2013 and then re-elected in 2017 and 2021. And since the beginning, we tried to bring the Sustainable Development Goals as a very important tool to the management of the city. And we did that for many reasons. The first one is that we can't handle just one subject on time. We need to do a lot of things at the same time to promote the economic development, to assure the environmental sustainability, to assure the social fairness of our society, and obviously to mobilize all the local stakeholders to the common projects that we have, according to a, let's say, a new model of governance in which anyone can participate, either it can be a citizen or an institution. And therefore, we look at the Sustainable Development Goals as a very important tool, a holistic tool that can cover all the dimensions of the management of the city, and that can help us not only to plan, to identify the situation in which we are, monitoring the results that we are achieving, but also creating that effect on mobilizing all the other stakeholders for the achievement of the goals. And actually, when we are talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, we are talking about a global issue, a continental issue also. These topics are being discussed in the United Nations, in the European Union, in many other regional organizations. But more than that, they are a local issue. And we are talking about the quality of life of our citizens. And I think as the OECD has shown in many surveys and studies that they have developed, if we don't mobilize and if we don't engage the local and regional authorities to the fulfillment of the goals, we won't achieve them at all. And that's why in Braga, we have been doing this work, and we have been working with universities, for instance, trying to produce an annual assessment, a local voluntary review, how it's usually called, on the goals and the indicators set that can obviously give us a picture of the way we are proceeding, and also working together with other cities. At the European level, we are, the city of Braga is a member of many networks, the Eurocities, the Global Parliament of Mayors, the URBACT, a network that is sharing the best practices in terms of SDGs according to European cities. And I am also a member of the Committee of the Regions and European Committee of the Regions, an organ of the European Union where the local and regional authorities take place, and in which I have been the rapporteur for the two opinions, one which was already concluded, delivering the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, and another one that is focusing on the progress on fulfillment of the goals. Because as you know, and that was a problem overall in the globe, these 2 recent years of pandemic revealed a setback in the fulfillment of the goals, and the crisis that we are dealing with in terms of energy, in terms of inflation, in terms of the war in Ukraine, are obviously having severe consequences for the goals, and we need to make a push so that globally and locally we can obviously contribute to the fulfillment as soon as possible. And Braga, for instance, had the commitment to deliver the goals by 2030. And to do so, we not only have used these tools, but also brought to the local policies the priorities of the goals. In terms, for instance, of sustainability, we have been developing a huge renewal of the mobility policy in the city, creating bike lanes, stimulating the use of public transportation, renewing our bus fleet. Currently, we have around 40% of our bus fleet which is full moved at electric energy. Also creating more pedestrian zones so that we can stimulate an appropriation of the citizens of the public space, which was very important in the pandemic period, but we want to proceed with that for the future. Obviously renewing the energy sources of the public buildings, of the public lighting, and so many other areas in which we are working also with research institutes. In terms, for instance, of the economic development, we have been very active. Braga became one of the most competitive cities in the country and one of the more attractive cities in Portugal, because we have managed to link the companies with the knowledge centers in the city and became a very innovative city as well, creating 2,000 jobs per year. We have a population of nearly 200,000 inhabitants, so it's a significant figure for our reality. And we made it by attracting a lot of foreign companies and stimulating the attraction also of talent. It's something that we are very concerned as well, is to attract and to retain the talent in our city. And we are a very young city. We have 40% of our population below 30 years old, but we are needing more and more to attract people from other sites in the country and from other sites in the world. Just to give you an example, we were the city in Portugal that grew more in the last decade in terms of population, and half of that growth came from outside of the country. So mostly Brazilians, people from South America, from other countries in Europe, and even from the Middle East have come to the city of Braga, taking advantage of the quality of life that we provide and of the economic development that we have. And at the same time, we have always tried to take care of our own, as Bruce Springsteen said, trying to lend a hand to the ones that need most, reinforcing, for instance, in terms of inhabitation policies, the public policies to make more accessible inhabitation for the people with less resources, creating more instruments to support, for instance, the rental of houses for the middle class, and creating more incentives for the growth of the urban area in terms of a sustainable development of the city. And this is all connected with the Sustainable Development Goals, because all of these areas have been planned, have been developed, and have been monitored together with the local stakeholders, the companies, the universities, the social institutions, and we have been working together in a common economic and social development model that has brought Braga to be one very attractive city in the current position. Obviously, we need to spread the word, and I think it is very important that more cities do this type of work. And I think that if I can take my last minute, I am a strong prescriber that cities do their own local voluntary reviews. There are a lot of projects that can support SDSN. For instance, I know that Difford Aubrey will be one of the participants of the forum as well, and others. But I think that we need also to be more stimulated and more supported by the national governments, so that our initiatives that are being developed at the local level can be more financed and more supported also by other levels of governance, so that we all work on the same direction. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mayor Rio. And I wanted to follow up on a thought that both that you had mentioned, and also one of our attendees, Vaishali Kushan, had mentioned in the chat. And she has said brilliant point regarding working with the network and developing partnerships. And actually, I wanted to turn back over to the Mayor of Limerick, Mayor Foley. And with that thought in mind, you know, we're talking about housing, we're talking about sustainable urban development, and in terms of the Limerick experience, and in particular your experience as a civic leader, as the mayor of the city, when we're thinking about development of partnerships, and you know, keeping in mind that we're a small group here, which means we can have some intimate discussion, but it is being recorded, and others will be able to watch this after, when it's shared after, especially for your heads of councils, the role on that network and partnership development. What has been your experience? What are the things, you know, if someone was a new mayor and trying to learn how to harness that network and partnership development, can you share a little bit specifically on the Limerick Council and City Council and your experience as a mayor?
I'll hand you over to Mick from Housing here, and he'll give you an update on that.
Hi there. I'm working with the mayor here on our housing program in Limerick, I could say that our experience is, well, the Irish government have started a semi-state body called the LDA, which is the Land Development Agency, and it's similar to the Copenhagen business model for developing state lands. So, if you know the Copenhagen model, where basically the council zoned land for housing, and then use the markup and the valuation of the land to pay for infrastructure such as a metro, and pay for public infrastructure using markup in valuations. They did that back in the 2000s, basically, and that became known as the Copenhagen business model for developing city areas. And 3 years ago, Ireland launched a semi-state body called the LDA, the Land Development Agency, with a similar mandate to what Copenhagen did 20 years ago. And that is bringing in competencies from a development arm to look at state lands and have a mandate to go and talk to state bodies and pull together larger plots of land that are within state ownership. Because some of the barriers to larger master plans getting off the ground is you have to talk with private landowners, but also state bodies can often be silos within themselves. So the state, quite cleverly, I suppose, set up a body which was semi-state, who had the mandate to go off and talk to all state bodies, whether it be councils or not, or railway stations, for example, which have land around them, and has a mandate to to move those state bodies to bring together larger catalogues of land. And that allows us to create housing master plans of scale, where you're talking about Limerick has a site here in the city centre, the Paulbert Master Plan, where we have some 2,500 units being programmed over the next 5 to 7 years. So that was an active move from the state, where they set up a development arm to go in and use some of that knowledge from private industry to develop out council lands. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Derek, maybe a little bit. That's the experience we have in Limerick in relation to large scale master planning.
No, that's terrific. Thank you. And I think that's very helpful, you know, as we try to do, you know, I think the Canadian experience right now is we're playing a lot of catch up. You know, there was a number of years where there was a bit of an inactive approach from government in the question of housing, and especially different forms of community housing, whether it's government owned, nonprofit entity owned, cooperative housing owned. I often tell people when I'm having this conversation around housing and housing affordability, if you take the city of Oshawa, which in Canadian terms is about a medium-sized city, or about 175,000, we're in a census metropolitan area of about 440,000. And I tell people, take a drive around or go walking, you know, jump on transit and go and visit all of the affordable housing developments, so be that government-owned, nonprofit, cooperative, and go and find the capstone on all of those developments, and you will rarely, if ever, find anything after 1995. All of these developments happened in a prior time due to national programs, provincial programs, and then the tap was shut off. And so now we reached this critical point where, you know, in communities where usually you only saw very marginal homelessness, and it has exploded around Canada in recent years, especially the last half decade, in a way that was probably unimaginable before. And there are many factors that are attached to that. You know, obviously the pandemic took an existing trend and accelerated it. It didn't create the problem, it accelerated an existing trend. And I was at a conference a month and a half ago in Ottawa, our national capital. It was the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. And I was speaking in a session on integrated mental health and addictions approaches. My ward includes the urban core of our city, so where you see some of those highest levels of homelessness, as well as concurrent disorders like mental health and addictions. And I opened up my remarks and said, indulge me, everyone. And there was about 100 municipal leaders from across the province of Ontario. And I said, indulge me in a very unscientific survey. How many of you in the last 3 to 5 years have seen an increase in homelessness, under-sheltered individuals, mental health and addictions? And no word of a lie, every single hand in the room went up. And it's a paradigm that was unimaginable in a place like Canada, really, just a decade ago. So, you know, I think that at the center of this conversation around housing and sustainable urban development is obviously planning, is action, but also partnership. I think is a very, very big piece of the pie, as Mayor Rio got us thinking about in terms of harnessing those partnerships. One of the areas in Oshawa that we've been very successful, not so much from a housing point of view, but some more sustainable city practices. We're very fortunate to have 2 universities and a community college in our city. So we have been tapping into that as well. So I want to turn to back to the chat box, which anyone is welcome, you know, at this point to use. I do see 2 links there that Mayor Rio has provided for us to some resources I believe that we can tap into. Actually, Mayor Rio, maybe if you could just tell us what those are, and then of course we can bookmark those as well for later interest.
Well, one is just a brief presentation of the city of Praga, where you can see the dynamics that we have and what has assured us the opportunity of, in the latest Eurobarometer of the European Union, having 97% of the people that were questioned saying that they were happy to live in Braga, because apart from, let's say, the hardware, the infrastructure that we have, we also have a very important dynamics in terms of culture, sports, social activities, and education, leisure, environmental contact, and landscapes. So it's a brief presentation of the city, but the other one is more connected with the theme of this panel, is the tool that we use from the Catholic University, which has a specific research institute that supports cities in developing their local monetary voluntary reviews. And this is the tool, the Sustainable Development Index, they produce every single year. On top of that, the city of Praga usually has its own sustainability report, which is produced in a yearly basis. And also linked with that, we try to bring the sustainable development goals also to our budgeting process. And for instance, the last report that we produced last year for the year 2022 already linked each initiative of the municipality, each investment of the municipality with the sustainable development goal that we are trying to achieve under that specific initiative. And that's also a way to raise awareness, to mobilize the other stakeholders. And we even created a local council for sustainability in which the main institutions are participating as well.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that with us. And Ozan, perhaps I've copied and pasted those. Perhaps once UEF gets around to posting these video resources, maybe they could be attached to that in some shape or form, but we can figure that out after. Thank you. I'd like to go back to a question. There's a really interesting one here, again from Vaishali. And the question is, how does population distribution contribute towards the public services? This is an area that a subject area that I am very interested in. I'm actually right in the middle of a municipal election here in Ontario. Our municipal elections are happening all across the province. So I was very lucky to be able to just take a day off from knocking on doors and interrupting people during their dinner to participate instead in Urban Economy Forum. But this has been a very, very common theme. Again, in the ward that I represent, it is still largely suburban, but it is starting to densify. So on the subject of population distribution, where it used to be very low density, we are starting to see some of the infill developments. We are starting to see older housing stock that is suburban sprawl being replaced with medium density housing and so forth. I've had many conversations at the doors talking to residents about part of the problem with our current, in a city like Oshawa, our current population distribution because of the suburban sprawl and just how economically inefficient suburban sprawl is to run the city. So it's a very front of mind conversation for me right now. So just regarding population distribution and that contribution to public services, maybe Mayor Rio, I'll go back to you first on this, and then I'll turn to Mayor Foley after yourself.
This is a very important issue, and for a city like mine, which has around 183.5 square kilometers, it's a very important problem, because obviously we have the more densified urban zones, the center of the city, the historic center, let's say the first area of expansion of the city, which is now completely condensed. And then we have some more peripheral zones in which we still have some villages and some rural areas also in our territory. And obviously we need to balance two things. One is precisely the topic of this question, is how we can provide the services that every single citizen deserves, and not obviously exhausting the financial resources of the municipality by expanding the network of all those services to the territory. What we try to do is to develop a cohesion policy in which we assure that the basic infrastructure reaches every single part of the territory. Either we are talking about sewage, water distribution, public transportation, and other types of services, even sometimes some more administrative features, like for instance, the citizens' offices that we have distributed in the territory, so that people don't need to come to the center of the city to have their contact with the municipality. But obviously, trying to develop a specific planning in which we try to concentrate as much as possible, not putting in risk the quality of life of those areas, the expansion of the city. And we have an urban director plan in which we identify the zones in which we advise the investors to create new areas of growth of the city, in which we all ourselves create new areas of expansion, so that we try to concentrate the resources of the infrastructure in those areas, because obviously otherwise it will be a major investment to cover all the territory.
Great, that's some great insight. And I'll, on that same question, population distribution and how that contributes towards public services. Mayor Foley, I'll turn to you and your team again.
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, I suppose, for Irish regional cities, because if you look at like the suburbs of Limerick would be something like 25 to 30 units per hectare. And what we found is that you need at least 50 units per hectare density to make a kind of a sustainable suburbia where you have some kind of facilities which allow people to have a local shop or a smaller social center. Without that level of density, basically, you just have urban sprawl and a small green area in the front and car parking. And it is a challenge for many regional Irish cities, how we densify the city centre. Limerick is a little bit unique in that the Georgian core that we have in Limerick is actually about 100 units per hectare, even though, so you have to imagine a house which is 5 stories tall, right? And previously it would have been one family living in that 5-story house because it was a wealthy family. But now the floor plates are so big that you could actually put 4 1-bed or 2-bed units in what used to be a single dwelling. So on density wise, they're actually a reasonably fair density. It's 100 units per hectare. Copenhagen density of 5 to 6 levels is about 150 units per hectare. And that's basically the sweet spot where they believe that density allows you to fund public transport, allows you to fund enough community facilities that the people who live there enjoy living where they live. So Limerick is in this kind of teething process of trying to design infill projects in the old city centre and trying to work out, what is the right density for infill projects where maybe people, the locals would be used to something like 25 to 30 units per hectare, and suddenly you're going up in 6 levels with a dense city centre apartment scheme. But that is what we have to do to be able to gain the densities in the city centre, to be able to create proper public transport. And it is one of our key challenges here, is that we are a car-dominated city. I mean, Ireland particularly is affected by car dominance. And that isn't solved overnight. I mean, really, really effective bus systems are probably the quickest way of bringing it on board. But one thing the city is doing is we have very active funding and active travel initiatives. So we are putting in cycle lanes across the city and making it safe. And a couple of times it's been mentioned now during the conference today, which I thought was very interesting, was the idea of active travel and safe transport links as a way of dealing with inequality between male and female roles in the workforce and female safety in evening events in the city. I thought that was very interesting, that as car dominance degrades and public transport increases, so too does the level of equality across the city from all of its residents improve. So we have challenges, but we're working forward, I would say, and density is one of the key ones going forward.
Thank you. Great. Yeah, and there is a comment in the comment box about agree that social centers and social space is one of the
we've rebuilt or new buildings that we've constructed in the last 10 or 15 years, and trying to assess how successful we've been in delivering those buildings and how well they've stood up over a decade or more of life. And there isn't an easy answer. And the problem is that there's a basic economics of how much a building costs to operate. Now, our buildings are becoming less costly to operate as we move to our sort of net zero buildings. So very low energy inputs, much higher capital inputs to get us to that point. But still, there's the regular day-to-day maintenance of the projects that is very challenging for large public landlords like Toronto Community Housing. Rent geared to income rents require subsidies, and those are subsidies that can't be carried on the property tax base. They need to those are subsidies that need to come from senior government, and so historically, that's how public housing worked. Is that there was senior government operating subsidies, senior government capital subsidies that made it possible. That's continues to be the case, and unless we move to a more market-based approach to the delivery of the housing and have market rents, where we can at least get over the hurdle of having enough revenue to support operations, we'll never be there with particularly with the very low income households that we serve.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Claudia, do you want to pick up on that theme with operating costs for land trusts?
Yeah, thank you. And again, interesting question. I think the difference here is that Peter was describing public housing, what we call here in the UK housing associations. I think that's what UEF4 is. And what I was presenting is community land trust for home ownership, because.
And he's okay, great. The recording's back on, just in time for my little segue there. So the question of when we're dealing with existing neighborhoods and residents who have been in neighborhoods that exist for many years, sometimes many generations, and then change is in front of them. And I would love to hear from our mayors on, as civic leaders, what you do, or what your process is, or what your just your guiding philosophy is on change and helping to support them through change, knowing that we have to, that it isn't something that's optional. These are changes that we have to make, and what are we doing as we go through changes? That sort of that social piece of our role. It's political, it's a bit social, it's a bit communication, and those sorts of changes. So maybe I'll go back to Limerick City for this one, and just hear your thoughts on sort of that change and that political leadership.
Yeah, I suppose the most important thing is that you talk to people, be honest with people. That's the way forward, really, you know. And public consultation. And I see down to the last number of years since being elected as a councillor, that to me, you have to discussions and talking to people and listening to people is very, very important in our deliberations.
Good. Just a further thought on that, Mayor Foley, and our different government structures and governance is different from country to country and province to province and district to district. Are you, tell me a bit about how it works both in Limerick City and perhaps with your upper levels of government when it comes to change in a neighborhood. Is there a legislative obligation to do consultation with the public that you absolutely have to go through in terms of steps of consultation, or is it optional? Is it something that is a good practice but not mandatory? Is it legislated or required, or is it an optional thing to do consultation?
Yes, we have to be consultation with our electorate. It's very, very important, and I fundamentally believe that in everything we do, we have to discuss it with our electorate, get their consensus. Very, very important, and I guess it's important for us to work that way. Very, very important. And as I say, me as a public person, to the one of the main focus on my career basically has been dealing with people, listening to people, and listening to what they have to say. And it's part of the planning process that we listen to people, and they can make objections or observations, and that's very, very important. People will listen to.
Great, thank you so much for that. And Mayor Rio, over to you. Same question. in terms of how you see your role as, the communication, the politics, the social component of change in these neighborhoods as they go through change. Talk a bit about your role.
Well, first of all, in terms of the local framework here in Portugal, we don't have to have the specific consultation process, or we are not obliged to engage the citizens or its representatives. But usually these processes have to involve let's say the residents of each of the zones, not only informing them before, but also trying to stimulate their sense of belonging to the zone, because obviously if they are the first one to take care with the areas in which they live, in which they play, in which they work, they are obviously helping the municipality to have a better city. And therefore we have, even for instance in the city of Braga, stimulated in recent years the creation of local associations of neighbors, so that we have an identified stakeholder for the discussion and for the preparation of these interventions. Obviously the change is always present, but when we have let's say global goals for the city, like the ones that I mentioned, you were talking about Limerick. In Braga, we also have the problem that too many people use their own vehicles. Braga was created throughout the last decades before my election as a city friend of the automobile, so people were used to use their own vehicles rather than use any other mean of transportation or for their mobility needs. And we have been trying to change this mindset, not only reinforcing the public transportation, as I mentioned, for instance, for the upcoming mandate that we are now, we have a very important project that will represent a strong investment in a bus rapid transit, so a new source of transportation, new form of transportation in the urban area of the city. But we have also been intervening in several residential zones in which we have been trying to create wider spaces for pedestrians, lanes for bikes, and a better organization of the public space. And the biggest problem that we have to deal in Braga and in most of the European cities is when we are subtracting areas for the automobile, parking zones. And we obviously need some courage, but I think that more than courage, we also need some diplomacy, because when you were talking about the communication, we need to show to people that we are working to improve their quality of life in that specific zone. And usually people, what they want is to have their car parked outside of their house. And that's the big threat that they see when we intervene in these zones in this type of approach. But I think that if we manage to engage them and to show them the benefits that they will take advantage of in the future, we can develop these specific initiatives. And in Braga, we have been capable of doing so as well.
Wonderful, thank you. I'll just follow up.
Yep.
Sorry, just one quick comment, Derek, and I suppose
yes,
it's and listen to the mayor there talking. We the same situation here in Limerick. Everybody wants to be able to park outside their own door, but obviously since COVID, changed our train of thought, and we've seen more cycle lanes, better access through the city, better access through a lot of our bigger towns as well. So I say that the problem is in Limerick with every city. The problem is that we want cars, we want spaces for our cars, we want everything for our cars. But since COVID, people's attitudes have changed slightly, that there are no more thought process is towards cycle lanes, walking, and so on and so forth. So I suppose if anything good has come out of COVID, our training thought has looked more so to walking, cycling, and more outdoor facilities. And it's the same with outdoor dining and outing. That has changed our attitude as well here in especially in our county towns. More so, might have seen more of it in our cities with outdoor dining for years, but since COVID, there's an awful lot of outdoor dining available and so on and so forth. So it's changed also. What I'm hearing here is that with the same problems in every city, really across the globe in a lot of places, you know. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you. That's really appreciate that follow-up thought on that. So I'm looking at the time, and we're coming up a couple of minutes to the end of this session. So what I'll do is I will say thank you both so very much, and I think that was some good thoughts to wrap up on. Both Mayor Foley's comments about how the pandemic in particular has helped us to now start to think differently about and really to think in a way. It's going back to a time before we were building car-oriented cities, and now we have renormalized that way of thinking, which I think is exciting for cities. I'll also just highlight a comment that Mayor Rio made in terms of our role as city leaders. He mentioned the words courage and diplomacy, which is so important as we navigate our cities through change. I come from a city that at one point in time had the largest, it's a General Motors automotive manufacturing plant, and at one point was the largest automotive manufacturing plant in all of North America. So certainly the messages from both mayors about navigating our cities through the change from that car-centric desire and mentality to one that is more diverse, more walkable, more cycling, more pedestrian space, which really is a big piece of sustainable cities. It resonates very strongly with me and some of the conversations that I have in my community. And I see that our time, we have 1 minute left. So what I will do to wrap up is I will turn to either of you if there is any final 15 to 20 second thoughts that you wanted to share today. I'll start with Mayor Rio and then Mayor Foley. So anything in wrapping up?
Well, just a brief remark because of this late discussion on the implications of the pandemic is that we need to make our cities flexible to adapt to each of the realities that we are challenged to. And the pandemic was a great example of that, when we started to use public spaces for terraces, for bars, for restaurants, and obviously bringing people from the offices, from the gyms, from whatever inside spaces to the public space. And I think that brings us the strong message on the value of the public space for the city's development.
Thank you, Mayor Rio. And Mayor Foley, any parting 15 to 20 second thoughts?
Yeah, I suppose just with regards to the conversation we've had in there for the last, what I basically see is that our problems are basically the same in all our cities. Climate change is very, very important. Climate action is very, very important that we, as I said in my few words there earlier on, that we're facing the next number of years major problems if we don't change our habits. It is very, very important that all our leaders come together, which they have on numerous occasions, but implement what they're proposing and what they've promised. We can see the damage that's been done to our planet. We've seen it every week, every day in our television screens, what's actually happening because of climate change. Very, very important that all these are implemented. So thank you for inviting me again, and I'm delighted to participate in this forum. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor Foley. Thank you, Mayor Rio. We greatly appreciate your thoughts today, your experiences, and your leadership. We wish you all of the best. And I hope that someday I can come to visit both of your beautiful cities and see it in person.
Eric, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Ozan, I think